Please welcome author and investor Mercator Investments Frits van Paasschen and Skift co-founder and editor-in-chief Jason Clampett.
Thank you for being here, Frits. Very excited. One thing that we don't get from the voiceover, which was mistakenly left off, I guess, that Frits is also the former CEO of Starwood Hotels and Resorts, and somebody who I think a lot of you in the audience have either worked for or worked with along the way. From running into some people this morning and yesterday, I heard a lot of, hey, we look forward to seeing him, and so that's exciting. One of the reasons we have Frits up here too is not just his expertise with Starwood, but his history outside of hospitality too, and expertise in thinking about brands and thinking about consumers. You know, a lot of people in the hospitality industry come up through the ranks and you know, might start as a front desk or in a management trainee program. Frits came from the outside with a level of branding expertise, which I think really hadn't been seen in hospitality. Background of Nike, Coors, and Disney, among other things, which gave him an insight into the industry that I think few had, and allowed him really, from the time he arrived in 2008 to the time he left 2015, to really shape the brand in new ways, which made it really exciting to be able to talk to Frits today. So we're a year and a half out from your departure from Starwood. A few things have happened. Marriott has a few more brands. Hotels still don't know what to do about Airbnb, and the dollar is kind of stronger than it's been in a really long time. As you've had time to sit back and reflect from a distance, what do you see as kind of this outsider now that the industry is kind of missing out on?
Yeah, I think what's still missing in the industry is the fact that travel, even in the 21st century, even for all of the innovation that's taken place and change, it's still inconvenient, anonymous, and uncertain, right? There are pain points all along the travel process. People who are supposed to provide hospitality don't know who you are and what you want. More often you're seat 12A or room 310. And the uncertainty piece is, yes, there's an extraordinary amount of information available, but a real dearth of information that's potentially relevant to any one individual. So there's a lot still that can happen in the hospitality business in a good way. This is a great breeding ground for ever more innovation. And we really haven't cracked the code yet as an industry.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting, you know, I'll talk about big data, which we've had for years, and the insights you have. You know, I think when I'm on a plane or at a hotel, and I don't get the kind of recognition I feel I deserve, not, you know, do you know who I am type of recognition, but, you know, I'm a customer.
Google me, I'm
huge. Yeah, exactly. You know, but, you know, I've been to this place 15 times. I fly in airplanes X times a year, and I don't feel that, well, you know, I'd like that. Or, you know, you could say, hey, Mr. Clampett, good to see you again, you know, that type of thing. Well, you know, what do you think is stopping brands from being able to take advantage of this, you know, massive set of, you know, data and insights, and then actually implementing it in a way that really resonates with consumers?
Well, I think it's the intersection between people and technology that's still the biggest barrier and challenge, right? As you've pointed out, and as people have said, there's no dearth of information. There's plenty of data about you and what you want in all kinds of places. But how do you get the right information in the hands of people who are delivering service at the moment when they should do that? Mm-hmm. And the pace of improvement in technology is now far faster, exponentially faster than humans' ability to change behavior, let alone large organizations to change how they think about what they do, who their guests and their customers are, and how to make sure they get what they want. So it's more organizational than digital at this point in terms of what's holding us back.
Mm-hmm. So until a few years ago, as mentioned earlier, you know, a lot of hotel executives were those that came up through the ranks. We've seen some changes recently as hospitality also is a real estate game. We've seen people come from the property sector in. What's the benefit of the outsider views that are kind of permeating in some hospitality brands now, and how does that benefit?
I think the real benefit in any business and the best decisions you make are when you have a group of people around the table who have different perspectives and different experiences. And I can't tell you how many times I've walked into a room not knowing what the decision was going to be, but having it emerge from a discussion by well-expressed different points of view from people who think differently. And so the value isn't so much just in someone coming from outside the industry. It's the interplay between the non-industry brand experience perspective, such as I might bring, as well as people who really understand hotels. And I spent a lot of time listening to people at Starwood who knew what they were talking about when it came to running hotels, because I didn't want to pretend like I really knew anything anywhere near as much as they did. So when I got to the hospitality business, I was struck at how people were saying, Starwood's got these lifestyle brands. And quite honestly, I didn't actually know what they meant by that. And it occurred to me later that because I had been at Nike for a good long time, I had a sense that all brands were in effect lifestyle brands, that brands were not just about a guarantee of reliability and consistency. And that's really, I think, where a good deal of the industry mindset still was at that time. And that's an emergence from all the way back in the Industrial Revolution, that brands came to be when mass production and mass distribution separated producers from consumers. But brands, once you got to the age of television and the age of broader communication, brands like Nike can have a real personality. They resonated with something more than just, hey, this is a good running shoe. People wanted to be a part of that. So, and what I think Weston and W proved is that lifestyle brands, personality brands, could drive rate. They could drive commercial success. And I think what we were able to do, combining the experience of people around the world and that sense of those brands, was take those brands and make them global. So Weston and W went from being North America brands to global brands in that time period between 2007 and 2015.
Two things there I want to pursue. First, with the lifestyle brands, everybody wants to be a lifestyle brand. We did a quiz last year and took the names of all the new lifestyle hotels and took the names of condoms, and it was a guess which people had to guess which it was, a lifestyle hotel or a condom. And the trick was,
out of the Trojan Hotel.
Yeah, out of the 9 brands, 2 of them were both. So in an age when everybody, of course you want to be a lifestyle brand, especially hospitality, because that's a way to get people to think about you consistently when they don't, put your shoes on every day. What's the real challenge for actually converting that desire to be that into actual adaptation to buying the bed, the heavenly bed or something like that?
Yeah, so creating a lifestyle brand or a personality brand in hospitality is actually a lot more difficult than it is with sneakers and beer. I mean, in beer, you change the ad, you change the packaging, you get the image, and you've gone a long way to creating a personality around that brand. The hospitality business, as you guys all know, is so capital intensive that if you want to create a consistent personality, not just consistency, but a consistent personality across design, the way associates are trained and interact with guests, the way the digital interaction works, takes a lot of work. And the challenge in the hospitality business is, it's like, I used to think it was like looking at the stars at night. You'd see stuff that had happened years ago finally kind of hitting the light of day, right? You have hotels out of the brass age that are still kind of a part of the day-to-day experience. And, the result is that I think most hospitality brands stayed in that era of reliability and consistency. And you almost had to walk outside of the hotel and look at the sign on the building to figure out which brand you were staying in, because it was basically a generic nice hotel or a generic really nice hotel or maybe even a generic luxury hotel. And I think that remains a big challenge given the scope and scale and the very nature of the hotel business.
The other part you talked about taking Weston W to Asia. And everybody, of course, wants to expand globally. Don't necessarily have the tool set to do it. I think when we talked this summer, and you had mentioned when you first started looking at Starwood properties that did exist in China, none of the materials given to the employees were in local languages. They were all in English. And what's the challenge of then translating that desire to be global and actually making global impact so that your brand is distinct there and not just kind of an American cast-off?
Right. So I think the fun part about global branding is navigating exactly that balance between global consistency and local relevance. With the compounded issue for the hotel business being, of course, people are actually not necessarily from the region who are staying in hotels around the world. So that consistency piece has to be there. The real shift, though, I think, is in going from being a company that thinks in terms of domestic and international, which are two words I wanted to obliterate from the lexicon, and start to think about different places around the world and having a dialogue with your associates and your colleagues around the world, and really understanding what they're asking for and what their trade-offs are, and ideally, what their perspective is and why they're saying what they're saying, right? And finding ways to be responsive. So there was no reason that Starwood shouldn't have SPG training materials and guest-facing materials in Chinese. I mean, that was one of those when I was asked that in 2008, they said, well, we haven't gotten approval for that. And I said, well, actually, you just did. So, and, things like having a call center in China, having double byte booking so you could have a mobile site in Chinese language as well, finding ways so that when 25 million Chinese are going outside of their country for the first time, they have a place to call in and get the help that they need, in the same way that people who go abroad would want to make sure that if they needed to, they could speak English with somebody. So those were all pretty basic things, but also making sure that nonetheless that the ethos of the brand, the sort of 2 or 3 word epithet that describes that brand and its personality are evoked by the design and the behavior and the ambiance that you have in a hotel. And I think it's finding that balance. It's actually a lot of the art and science of being in the global branded business.
Two of the things that you became associated with, at least in our office, as we think about at Starwood, was looking at international in a different way, and also technology and innovation. And at times it seems like hotels have kind of reached the peak build out. Like you can build rooms slightly better, things like that, but all the innovation is going to be happening on the technology side and knowing the guest. Can you talk a little bit about kind of what drove your tech innovations when you're at Starwood, and kind of what your, whether the unfinished things or the things you want to see kind of happening next within the industry?
Yeah, and in many respects, I think that personalization is the next manifestation in the evolution of brands, right? So if you have this emergence of brands as being reliable and then having personality with media, now with mobile digital access that people have at all times, brands really can deliver personalization. And if everybody took out their iPhone and their Samsung device, it would be tailored to what they want. So the expectation of people, of brands from other industries is, you should know me and know what I want. I mean, Netflix and Amazon are telling me what to buy, or even sending me stuff before I even think I need it, right? And you're still making me wait in line and show my credit card, right? Or even the airlines, which I wouldn't describe as being exactly kind of tech forward as an industry. At least you can check in online and get your boarding pass on your iPhone. You can't even get into your room that way, right? So there's a lot of catch up, I think, that the hotel industry still needs to make. And the upside to it, going back to the point before, is it's still anonymous and inconvenient and uncertain, right? There's a lot of value still to be created in making that experience seamless, right? You go to somewhere for the first time, you walk into a hotel brand that you resonate with, they know who you are, they know what kind of room you want, you can have a seamless experience. It's just better.
Mm-hmm. We can talk about this at the top level, of course, whether the parent brand or the sub-brands or things like that, but what seems to me the pain in the butt in the hotel industry is once you get down to the bottom, you don't own and operate the properties in many of the cases. And so you can get the consumer on board, but then getting the owner on board or the investment group that owns it on board, what does it take to, and they can just decide, okay, we'll reflag if you put these standards down on us like that. How do you get that buy-in, and so that they can kind of share that vision as well?
So when you think about the hotel ownership community, what matters more than anything else, of course, is whether what you're doing delivers value to them, right? So, the sell when it comes to the hotel ownership community is all about the economics. The sell to the associate base, the personnel who are working in the hotels, is really about making them feel connected, right? And one of the statistics I watched very closely every year was what percentage of people understood the strategy of the company and understood their role in delivering that strategy. Because I think when people have a sense of mission, a sense of being a part of a greater whole, there's a lot of things that people will do. Probably the least effective motivators of people are fear and greed, right? The sense of affiliation, the sense of purpose, the sense of winning, I think, is a much more powerful way to mobilize large groups of people. And the beauty of that is, even if you're in 100 countries and people speak all kinds of different languages and have different cultures, those fundamental human truths nonetheless resonate. So finding a way of describing what's happening in the world, what our company is doing, and then what I need you to do for me, I think is the kind of messaging that can really work.
One part of the Marriott-Starwood deal that happened was okay, now we're better positioned to deal with the OTAs. Which in talking to people in the OTA community, they say, that's a great position when the economy's up. But when the economy's down, you're trying to sell a hotel room, are they going to come begging back to the OTAs? What's your view of the kind of continued rise and also consolidation in the OTA industry?
Well, look, I think the OTAs have done a phenomenal job, right? And Priceline bought Booking.com for what, $125 million?
Best deal in
probably the best deal
history.
Any industry, right? Like, so to be lucky like that or smart like that twice would be even better. But the fact of the matter is that, first of all, I don't think the OTAs have finished their organic growth phase yet, right? The second is that the online travel booking business is a network business. It's a network of hotels. It's a network of consumers. And digital networks are just like old-style networks in the sense that they're natural monopolies. There's a reason why there was just one railroad company or one electric utility. And the same thing's happening in the digital network business. There's only one Facebook. There's really only one Google. So there's a natural tendency for network businesses to get larger and to consolidate. So, and if you look at it, right, I mean, you heard Jillian talk about it. Marriott is talking about over 1 million rooms. She's talking about over 1 million properties, right? Their market cap is equal to Hilton, Hyatt, Marriott, and Starwood put together, right? So it's pretty hard to say that they haven't done a lot of things right. If they have a weakness, it's that even more than the hotel companies, they don't control the on-property experience. And they have been able to charge, in the view of hoteliers at least, an extraordinary amount for a booking, right? And therefore, that they're creating, I think, a price umbrella for the hotel companies to be able to respond, right? And if you look at Autograph or if you look at Tribute, in a lot of respects, they're not that different from a long-term OTA contract, right? It's just a different way of packaging how I'm going to fill the rooms in your hotel. I'm going to charge you a % of all of your top line, and you have to sign on for 5, 10, 20, 30 years, as opposed to a la carte, which is the way the OTAs are working. So in many respects, there's a real blurring of the business models there. And on the one hand, it's a scary thing for the hotel companies because the OTAs have been so strong there. On the other hand, with that price umbrella, I think they've created room for the hotel companies to continue to exist.
So we can't talk consolidation without talking about the deal which went down Friday. Marriott now 30 brands, some of which used to be your brands. And I think one of the criticisms, the public criticisms you as a CEO was, hey, he's not thinking about consolidation or whatnot, which probably isn't accurate. Do you want to talk a little bit about your impressions about the deal, which is 18 months closed after you've left?
Yeah, look, I think not everybody would know that I thought this, but I felt that consolidation in the hotel industry was inevitable. And for a few reasons, most of which have to do with the fact that if your competitive set now includes Airbnb as well as the OTAs, then suddenly, in Starwood's case, being the 4th largest hotel company with admittedly a great set of brands and a high-end portfolio of hotels, particularly outside of the US, is not the most defensible position. What's unfortunate, of course, is that if you want to consolidate, you want to do that at a time when your relative value is greater. And prior to 2014, when the dollar was weaker, when emerging markets were more ascendant, that would have been a much better opportunity for Starwood and Starwood's shareholders, Starwood's associates, to combine forces with somebody else. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. And what happened now is basically a a merger which I think was in some ways or in some form was inevitable. It's just not great timing for the company. It's just too bad.
You mentioned Airbnb, and I think that's a word that a few of us have mentioned on stage and in audiences. And I'm going to be talking to Chip Conley later today. Do you think that hotel executives in the industry at the top really understand that phenomena yet? And by the phenomena, I don't mean the renting in rooms and things, but the consumer experience, consumer relationship with that brand, and kind of where that's leading hospitality?
Is that the easiest question so far? Yeah. Look, I think the reality is that incumbents always underestimate the strength and the power of disruptors, right? And part of that is human cognitive bias, right? We like to deny things that don't make sense in our world. Part of that is structural. You set up these large organizations, they're very focused on doing one thing very well. Their definition of success is doing that one thing even better, not thinking about what's happening on the side. And then you have a lot of people who have a vested interest in the world staying the way it was. So there's a natural tendency, I think, not just among hotel executives, but anybody who's facing disruption to say, yeah, I'm not too worried about those guys. And Clay Christensen at Harvard Business School has a great talk through about the steel industry and how these mini mills came along and they started making rebar. And the big foundry companies said, yeah, it's just low margin business. And they kept moving up market. And 15 or 20 years later, they had eviscerated the large foundry companies. And there wasn't a single one of those companies that had built a mini mill, right? And I think there's an object lesson in that. If you look at Airbnb today, and obviously many people know much more about the company than I do, but look at New York, right? There's 110,000 rooms for hotels, roughly speaking, and what are there, 40 or 50,000 Airbnb listings? Now, the average price between the two is maybe 150 average versus 300, but it's kind of like the rebar story, right? I mean, you're getting more and more people of higher demographics, of higher incomes, looking at different peer-to-peer lodging experiences and saying, you know what? I like the room, I like the space, I like the amenities, I like the anonymity. There's a whole bunch of things. I like the location because you can be anywhere in the city, not just wherever the hotel happens to be. So I think people ignore the threat, if that's the right word, the incursion of Airbnb at their peril, right? And if you look at where New York is today and where rates are relative to where we are in the cycle and occupancy, it's pretty hard not to argue that something isn't going on already.
Often disruption is about brands not recognizing the true competitive set now. So not realizing, oh, we are competing with the rebar. Years ago, I used to work for a guidebook company, and when sales started to go down, we always liked to look at where market share was, because that was better than looking at where sales were. So we maintained market share, but we didn't realize that TripAdvisor had eaten everybody's lunch and then had their dinner and then had dessert.
And then rated it.
Yeah, and then rated it. So what is it in terms of thinking about modern travel brands, even outside of hospitality? How should they be thinking about their competitive set now? So it's not just, hey, we compete against this hotel, but we compete against this, or airlines, we compete against high-speed rail, or here or there.
Yeah, I think it goes back to this whole idea of following the money, right? And by that I mean where travelers are spending from the moment they think about going somewhere to the day they get back home after that. And whoever is making travel less inconvenient, less anonymous, less uncertain is going to get rewarded by people spending, right? There's no dearth of money out there for people to spend on great experiences and getting those experiences with the least amount of hassle. So, I think continuing to look at where people are starting to spend their money and where they're going, I think is key.
For big brands, agility is the challenge. I can see a committee on agility meeting for 2 hours, at a big company. How do big brands, now that they have this strength?
It'd be like a yoga session.
Yeah. How do big brands, now that they have the strength to compete against different foes, remain agile?
Yeah, I think that in the past, the way large hotel companies were agile was they were pretty federalized, right? And it's like the old Chinese saying, the mountains are high and the emperor is far away. Each hotel was agile by being responsive to their marketplace and their guests, right? But the system overall wasn't agile. Those organizations were not set up to change quickly. And if there's a lesson to be drawn from digital network companies is, I mean, you look at Booking.com, you look at Google, you look at Amazon, they're testing all the time, right? Every day they can change their system. And there's no debate about what's centralized and decentralized. And those are two other words, I would love to banish from the management lexicon and say, look, this should be about having a global standard way of doing business that is based on the triumph of the best ideas wherever they come from. And how do we create a horizontal learning organization that can see what people want and that can make a switch? And the paradox of that is you almost have to start back at saying there are certain things about how we work that we got to standardize, right? That we're going to make consistent around the world, so that when I tell you we're going to make a change here, we can all do that at the same time around the world, not try to find 2, 3, 4, 5,000 novel solutions every time there's a change, because gosh, the way we run our hotel here is different from the guys down the street. And I think that sense of obliterating the idea of centralization and decentralization, having a standard way of working that's the product of learning across the organization, is really the only way that a large organization has a hope of becoming agile. And then of course, they have to have their Friday agility meetings just to be sure, right?
Excellent. Well, I want to thank you for joining us today, Frits. It was great having you here.
Yes. Good to see you guys.